Good morning everybody, and welcome back to another episode of my Runescape Oddities mini-series. Today we're going to be going over 4 or 5 different stories that I found really interesting, but on their own wouldn't really fit into a normal video. Anyway, let's get started. Now today, in the current game modes of Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3, there are just items that you cannot get. These are called unobtainable items, and generally they are either discontinued items or tools that are only obtainable by jagex moderators, or other relics from old updates or code that is still left in the game. Now today, for the most part, we all know what these items would do. For example, we have the rotten potato, we know all the options on it, and we know it's a really overpowered tool for jagex moderators. That said, if we jump back to RuneScape Classic, there are items that have similar mystique to them, but we never really figured out what they were. For example, back in RuneScape Classic, there was an item called the Reset Crystal. As far as I'm aware, it was never made public what this item did, but it was presumed to be another jagex moderator tool. Now the only option on the crystal was just reset, and if you examined it, it would say it helps reset things in game. No more information than that, and again, presume that it's similar to the rotten potato in some ways, but nobody ever figured out what it was resetting or what the purpose of the item was, obviously beyond Andrew Gower and maybe a few others. Now, a very similar item that was added back in May of 2001 with the Jewelry and Pottery update was something called a Superchisel. Now, for both of these items, their existence was determined by looking at the game files. Nobody actually saw them used or visible in the live game, but only in the containing files. Now, the Superchisel had the same look and inventory icon as an unstrung diamond amulet, but nobody ever figured out what the purpose of it was. Unlike the amulet, it could not be wielded, and the only option on it was twiddle. And what does that even mean? Was it a jagex moderation tool again? Was it meant to be a quest item that was never implemented? Maybe it was supposed to be the next best in slot amulet? We don't know, and at this point, I don't think we're ever gonna know. Now, if I were to make a guess as to which item jagex regrets adding to the game the most, I would say most likely Mithril Seeds. Now the obvious issue with Mithril Seeds is one, they were used heavily in player-run games of chance. As the way Mithril Seeds used to work, they would generate a random color which could be used for betting purposes, and those black market games ran for a long time. Now another really big issue with it was actually bug abuse. Now no clipping in games is something that happens a lot. It's pretty hard to prevent it entirely. But the Mithril Seed and the way that it pathed you actually allowed people to NoClip in Old School RuneScape at the beginning and in RuneScape 2 back in the day. Now here we have a player called Quint and YB who is using it October 2014 to clip over through the desert into the ocean. Now assuming that you're out of the area, you're kind of free to roam around, and one piece of land that is actually pretty close by to this is Tutorial Island. Now going back to Tutorial Island is something that a lot of players dream of doing, kind of look at where it all started, maybe flex on some noobs, but this player finally did it. Now once you're back on Tutorial Island, the game doesn't quite know what to do. I'm actually surprised there's even these failsafes here. For example, if you talk to Adam, he says, "Why are you here? I thought you left the island already." So there is actually a failsafe that prevents you from becoming an Ironman after you've returned to the island. That's pretty interesting, I thought of that. Now things that did work on Tutorial Island were trading, your bank. You could still bank things as normal. As we can see here, this player has random high-level gear on Tutorial Island, and you are able to put it in your bank. Now on top of having a failsafe for becoming an Ironman if you somehow return there, there's also actually a failsafe for removing items from Tutorial Island. Now around this time, there's actually a glitch on Tutorial Island that allowed you to obtain an unlimited amount of bronze arrows from Vanica, the combat tutor. The only problem though is there was no way to get that off of Tutorial Island because it deleted it upon finishing the tutorial. But now we know apparently also if you somehow manage to die or teleport off the island in another way. Now beyond the actual NoClip glitch to get here, which I find very interesting, but I find even more interesting than that is how Tutorial Island was coded to deal with rule breakers and the failsafes that it had. Now back in 2005, a lot of exciting updates were coming to RuneScape, but probably one of the biggest ones of the year was to be the new skill, Farming. Now farming was a highly anticipated new skill at the time, and beyond it being a new skill, which wasn't that uncommon at the time, it was going to be definitely by far one of the more unique skills ever released. Now to train farming, it did require you to have other items, those being seeds and saplings. Now in advance to the actual farming skill release, jagex decided that to help get ahead of the curve and to reduce demand on the actual release day, they would actually just put seeds into the game in advance. So Jagex decided to add in all of the herb seeds, and they were simply named herb seeds at the time. You didn't know what they were, and nobody really knew what the purpose was. I mean, people probably guessed, but nothing was certain. Well, instead of being a couple weeks in advance, it actually ended up dragging into the months because the farming skill was actually delayed. As with these seeds just kept piling up with absolutely no use. It got to the point that finally when the farming skill was released, there was a surplus of seeds, nobody really had any issue getting them, and many people had already stockpiled. Now there actually was a bit of an issue with players having a huge surplus of seeds. Now when the farming skill was initially released, there was nothing stopping you from planting a seed in the ground and then immediately digging it back up. You would actually still get the farming experience for planting the seed, and then you could just dig it back up again. I guess it would kind of be similar to construction. Now if seeds were actually more rare at the time, players might not have done that so much, but because there's such a surplus, I mean, why not? Free experience, and you could train the skill up way quicker than waiting. Well, obviously Jagex did eventually patch that out. They put through a pretty quick update that prevented you from digging up an allotment until it was fully grown, diseased, or dead. Now one thing I had never heard about until I was doing a bit of research for this video was way back in RuneScape Classic. Now a really iconic spell today is Bones to Bananas. Obviously today the spell isn't that useful and most people would use Bone to Peaches, but back in 2001, before the addition of the fishing skill, so really early on, Bones to Bananas was actually initially intended to be Bones to Bread. Now bread at the time, and I think today still, heals 4 hit points, which would have been twice as effective, which for a lower level spell and back in RuneScape Classic was considered to be kind of overpowered. As at the very last minute, Andrew decided to change it to Bones to Bananas, and it has remained that way ever since. Now, pure accounts are something that have existed for a long time. They date back all the way to RuneScape Classic, all the way through to the modern era. Now today, pure accounts usually involve limiting your defense or hit points in some manner, but there are very limited ways to do that, as so generally pure accounts are limited to a few different builds. However, back in RuneScape Classic, there are some pretty crazy pure accounts that you can make. We have covered a few of them already, like the Plate Pure, a discontinued account build. We've covered wine training, among other things, but one thing we haven't really covered yet is fatigue training. Now fatigue was initially added into the game as an anti-botting measure. So for example, if a bot was continuing to woodcut forever, they eventually would have to go rest because they become sufficiently fatigued. Now with that said, there was a bit of an exploit, you might call it, with the fatigue system. If you were sufficiently fatigued and you went ahead and killed a monster, you would actually only gain the attack strength or defense experience, and you would not get the hit points experience or hits experience. This allowed players to create pretty insane pure builds. For example, here's an image here of someone who has 10 hit points, 22 strength, 60 defense, and 66 attack. These accounts are obviously extremely popular for PvP, as you could kind of hide how strong you were because overall your combat level will be much lower. Now fatigue training existed for a long time, as far as I'm aware, pretty much the entire existence of the fatigue system. Eventually though, it was replaced and was never carried forward to RuneScape 2, as it wasn't a particularly popular system. It was pretty annoying for regular players and didn't really hinder bots that much at all. Now even by today's standards in old school RuneScape, these pure builds were pretty crazy, but today it is extremely annoying to do and a lot of players don't get very far. Anyway guys, that is going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have any interesting stories you want me to cover in a subsequent video, leave them down below. A lot of these stories from Runescape Oddities have been user suggestions, so I definitely read them, and if I find it interesting enough, I definitely will include it. So leave your comments down below because I will read them. Now before I go here, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my members over on YouTube. One of my newest members, Zayul, just joined the Dragon tier, which is totally crazy. They are joining James Luft, Brad Sings, Ocelot, and Kush Patel, all at the Dragon tier. Again, thank you guys so much. And also a huge thank you to Birdbot and Basetitch. As always, if you guys are looking for another way to support the channel, becoming a YouTube member is an awesome way to do so. It gives me some consistent income. In return, you could be immortalized into my videos, get access to a custom Discord member role, and access to my video release schedule. Anyway guys, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.